Hot air, carrying organic smells, blew steadily up from the station and tousled the tufts of hair that poked out from under Keith's baseball cap. The warmth was nice, the smell less so. He jogged down a few cracked yellow-tiled steps and pushed through a small, scruffy crowd who were also enjoying the warmth while they milled around in front of the ticket barriers. The desperate huddle shuffled out of the way as Keith approached. Before the barrier beeped and sprang open, he was subjected to a brief, almost overpowering encounter with super-strength beer fumes. The gate shut again after he passed, separating legitimate travellers from thermal tourists. It was after 10 a.m, and the morning rush was over, so the station was deserted. Keith followed the familiar tunnels to the platform, where a few other travellers were sitting or standing. He looked up at the long-dead information board. It was as blank as it had been for the past 5 years, but he didn't need to get out his companion or check his watch or resort to any of the other cybernetic oracles at his disposal to understand that he had just missed the previous train. Various forms of economic and political propaganda covered the walls, each plastered upon another, building up thick maché strata. In places, the weight of paper had pulled itself off the wall, sometimes revealing the scratched old inactive video screens below. The structure and the superficial layers of adverts and announcements charted the social trajectory of London. They captured proud Victorian wrought iron and hand-enamelled tiles, massive, chunky 70s surveillance cameras still hanging uselessly from ceiling-mounted poles, early 21st century flat screens that had once beckoned from every surface. Now, 2 massive poster-sized screens looked down on the platform and fed news and previews from upcoming shows to those who couldn't afford specs. Keith watched the huge screens distractedly, where a well-groomed young man in a wetsuit interviewed a dolphin using some new language translation software. Keith couldn't get the gist of the interview. The interviewer seemed to ask why the dolphin had written a book attacking humanity. A man on the platform was standing in the way, blocking the subtitles, so Keith couldn't catch the answer. There hadn't been a train for at least 10 minutes, and the platform was slowly filling up. A crude hanged man and the slogan, "Fletcher should die," were spray-painted onto an old yellowing underground map. For a few seconds, Keith was surprised at the audacity, as any street artist working down here was almost guaranteed to be caught by London Transport's vigilance and ubiquitous smelling, watching and listening. Then he figured it was just more cunning propaganda. Although Keith didn't follow the soaps, he knew Fletcher was a gang lord in one of the alternative reality shows. He recalled this one was set in a fictional dystopian London, where honest, hard-working people struggled against crime syndicates with ties to corrupt officials. Keith chuckled at the irony. Surprised for having been caught out, he wondered what else amongst the degenerate squalor was sophisticated stage dressing designed to subconsciously prime him for some long scam. Even as he looked down on the mentally lazy sheeple who followed the trash pumped out by the RBC or syndicated through the networks, he knew it was only with a constant effort of conscious filtering that he kept his own worldview intact. News shows deliberately mixed stories from fictitious versions of London with the real deal, and most people who watched did not have the mental discipline to separate fact from fiction. They relaxed and allowed the deceptions to wash over them. Bodies were crammed in around him. It had been 40 minutes. A distant screech and wad of approaching air finally announced a train. While he was being funneled in through the door, he took in the battered old aluminium carriage, its faded orange tartan seats and wooden planks showing through the worn linoleum. He wondered at the layers of deceit it represented. Keith thought he understood the world. Too many people, too much incompetence, not enough good old blitz spirit. Was this his analysis, or were subtle nudges guiding his thinking? "Morning, Mr. Wilson. I hope you had a pleasant journey. Would you like a glass of water or a coffee?" Keith looked up to see a pretty admin in a tight-fitting but smart blue business dress. She was reading from a companion tablet, probably showing his picture and biography and the details of the morning's meetings. "Hi, sure, a coffee, that would be great." Keith's eyes lingered as she turned and walked away to source him a cup of coffee, but he quickly lowered them, acutely aware his gaze and entire physiological state was almost certainly being scrutinized as he waited. The coffee hadn't arrived when she returned and told him they were ready for him. Cruel. His body's Pavlovian reaction to the offer of coffee, now unceremoniously retracted, rattled him. He felt as if he was losing composure just when he needed it most. Keith picked up his man-bag and followed, his gaze intently fixed on the back of the girl's neck. He was relying solely on peripheral vision to inform him of the pleasing way her hips swayed as she walked. They padded along the richly carpeted corridors, past conference rooms and offices. She stopped at a door, knocked politely, then, turning the handle, she gently pushed the door open for Keith. "Good luck. See you in a half hour," she said, smiling politely, before walking back the way they had come. The occupant of the office, a smartly dressed young man about Keith's age, dashed around his desk and across the room. He leant out of the door to observe the departure of the admin. "Ha! Keith, come in. How are you?" "Hi, Ben. I'm fine. How are you? How's the job?" "Good to hear. The job's great. I'm great. Just got back from fucking Somalia. Ever been there? Batshit crazy, I tell you." Ben put a paternal arm around Keith's shoulders and guided him into the office. It was spacious and simple, with low-key geometric art and subtle lighting. One wall showed a low-resolution scene of apparent rural bliss, a group of boys in whites playing cricket. There were formal neoclassical buildings in the background. Something about the scene was unpleasantly familiar to Keith. Despite the green grass, white-clad children and fluffy clouds, it evoked a vague sense of dread. "Drink?" Ben asked. "Coffee, thanks. I did ask the receptionist." "Ha! And did you get any? You think she's allowed to dole out coffee to any old pleb, Keith?" Ben chuckled. "Michelle, coffee for two," he said to the room. "Hey, look at this. I was just doing some research on a prospective candidate," Ben added cryptically, while gesturing for play to resume. Keith realized the scene on the wall was a frozen frame from a video. As the video unpaused, a voice called out, "Abimelch, 48, all out. Ishmael, 111 for 6. Well played, Peterson." Oh, fuck. Keith recognized the source of the scene's dread. The master took the captain's hand and shook it. The jubilant Ishmaelis patted backs and whooped as the Abimelchians sloped off back to the changing rooms in grass-streaked silence. The match had been held on top field due to the sorry state of the cricket oval, which had suffered irreparable damage during the ignominy of the end-of-term fete. Hundreds of people and dozens of tents mercilessly raped its 300-year-old lawn. "You fucking twat, Keith," a young Ben called out. "At least give us some sport when we crush you." Keith endured the long walk back down to the school. Even his own team was hanging back, joining the abuse. "My grandmother could have caught that lob," one of his teammates shouted. "Piss off, Winstone. If you hadn't bowled like a complete flid, they might not have been smacking sixes off us for the last hour and a half." "Ha! Remember that? We killed you, right?" "Sorry, what?" It took Keith a few seconds to snap back to the present. The cricketing clip had probably been captured by a kid with a phone. It had paused again, returning to its picturesque freeze frame. Keith's mind had skipped on a few chapters as a succession of memories from Gladworths, triggered by the video, played within his mind. "We slaughtered you." "Yeah, I don't think I played my best that day." "I got the vid from Hendy. Remember him? He was in your house, wasn't he?" Yeah. Dark hair, big farter." "Christ, yes. He was a colossal farter, wasn't he?" "Yes, he works for my father now. He dug out a bunch of stuff back from the old school. I'll ping them over to you if you like." "Sounds great. I'd somehow forgotten how much fun we had," Keith said. Ben either missed the sarcasm or let it slip. "So, you've decided to swallow your pride and take me up on the offer to come and work for us?" After uni, Keith had tried to find a job to fit his aspirations. Any residual optimism had been abraded by 4 years of shitty minimum-wage jobs in the sham economy. Unemployment for under-30s was 42%. Official inflation was 14%, while prospects for improvement were negligible. The desperate faces of the people on the streets gave a more accurate picture than any government numbers. He knew the despair of the people. He was intimately acquainted with it. His pride, by now, was only a small mouthful. So yes, he would swallow it. It was either that or join the army, which was always ravenous for young men with limited options. There was a polite knock at the door, and the pretty receptionist entered again, this time carrying a wooden tray with 2 cups of coffee, sugar and biscuits. 2 small stainless steel jugs of milk also sat on the tray. One was beaded in condensation, the other was steaming gently. The smell arrived a few seconds later. The volatile perfumed tang insinuated itself into Keith's nasal epithelial tissue and raced on into his mind. The quality of the experience had nothing in common with the coffee-flavoured drinks found on the high street. The tray was presented first to Keith, the guest. He took a cup and poured in a little of the hot milk, dropped in one lumpy brown crystal of cane sugar, and took a tiny silver spoon. He smiled his acceptance, and the receptionist straightened out of her bow, turned to Ben and repeated the ceremony. Ben took a handful of biscuits, a good long look at her cleavage and his coffee black. Once they were alone again, Ben continued. The world's a mess. People are pissed off, while at the same time there's a mint to be made. A mint? I would be happy to start off with a fraction of a mint and work my way up, Keith joked. I could start at the bottom. I don't need any special favours. Ben looked directly at Keith, at the coffee, and back to Keith's cheap shoes and suit. He didn't have to say anything. They both knew he'd been granted a special favour just to be sitting in this office. Ben pulled a printout from the desk and shook it at Keith. Not easy to put you in a pigeonhole, though. Warehouse experience? Barista pest control? Keith hated his CV. On the platform again, he was now acutely aware of the greasy, gritty warm air blowing around his ears. By the time he arrived home, his face and hands and the phlegm from his lungs would all be streaked with black. But it was not London's physical filth that made him feel dirty. At the age of 11, through some strange quirk of fate and bureaucracy, and to the astonishment and outrage of his bullies, Keith had been whisked away from the casual, institutionalized belligerence of state care. He was given what had been described at the time as a life of privilege. Even the young Keith was old enough to know that getting a scholarship to an elite school would eventually make the difference between stacking shelves and earning stacks of cash. On a day-to-day basis, the only difference had been the bullies' accents and the disappointing inversion of the cabbage-to-chip ratio at mealtimes. The school he and Ben had attended catered for the children of the 1%. It unquestionably delivered a 5-star education. Yet, despite astronomical fees and almost scandalous profitability, the amenities were 2-star at best. Apparently, discomfort was an integral part of the approach, which also featured plenty of physical exercise, institutionalized bullying, and austere meals. Ben had belonged there. His father was one of Britain's cabal of oligarchs. His company, now Keith's company too, he realized with a shudder of revulsion, had fingers in too many pies to count. Again, Keith was one of the token poor people. Over the years, his naive incomprehension at the source of the distinction between him and the other boys had been replaced with a rigid belief in his own moral superiority. He was real. He came up from the bottom, and he appreciated the worth of privilege and money. He had been convinced that one day he would go into the world and make it a better place. Inside and out, he felt dirty with the new BHJ corporate card itching through his thin polyester trouser pocket. He pushed in his earbuds and tuned into the big screen, which seemed to show a different portion of the same program he had caught earlier. At least it was the same reporter who had been swimming and chatting with the dolphin. A voice was talking over a collage of disturbing images, featuring lots of monkeys in cages. Europe had gotten the ball rolling in 2005 with the great apes. 20 years later, human rights belong to 5 species other than Homo sapiens. But the fight is not over. Victims of cruelty and slavery who can't communicate their suffering or make their own demands are too easily ignored. Now, we have a strange catch-22, with the recognition as people proving to be a two-edged sword. The Revob's laws can't apply to people, so unlike the honeybees or mosquitoes, nobody represents the sentient. Without their own voice, they have been stuck in limbo until now. The screen was showing a sequence of unpleasant photographs and clips. Animals with wires sewn into their shaved scalps, robot arms wired into primate brains, brain-scanning bath caps fitted to dolphins, animations showing images retrieved and loaded into cat optic nerves. Finally, cute pictures of baby dolphins and chimps playing with baby humans. With each little step, we learnt more, and eventually we learnt to read their minds. We scanned their brains to get at their thoughts. Symbols translated to and from our own languages. More pictures of baby animals. We learned how to miniaturize brain scanning equipment. We could